President Cyril Ramaphosa says efforts by the African Peace Mission in Ukraine are beginning to yield results. He was speaking at the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York. Ramaphosa says Russia has adhered to calls by the Peace Mission during their June tour to Kiev and St. Petersburg to return children taken by Russian forces from Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin is facing a warrant of arrest from the International Criminal Court for human rights violations in relation to the deportation of children.
One of the issues we raised was that there should be confidence-building measures that could create a sense of conflict towards the resolution of this conflict. In this regard, we said issues such as the return of the children who were removed from Ukraine should be returned. We also said that the prisoners of war should be exchanged between the two countries. I've just held a meeting with President Zelensky, who says that, in part, some of our efforts are bearing fruit as the children are now being returned and the prisoners are also being exchanged. But then we said we need to see this happening on a much faster pace.
Roland Henwood is a lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. He's a commentator. Roland, good afternoon to you. So President Ramaphosa says some progress is being made, and I suppose we have to ask how we define progress. Is it possible to know if some of these prisoner swaps would have happened without the African Leaders' Peace Initiative?
Good afternoon, Stephen. It's difficult to argue that it's only as a result of the involvement of African leaders, as much as one cannot argue that they did not have a role to play and they had no influence in the process. These are normally the kinds of things that happen, and it is probably one of the first steps that one would see. And I think the President is correct in calling these confidence-building measures. So yes, there is an element of that. I think also in this context is the fact that he had a meeting with Mr. Zelensky yesterday. That is important. If we think back to the initial stages, it took a very long time before Mr. Ramaphosa actually engaged President Zelensky. So that is also important. It seems that there is some momentum and at least some willingness to engage beyond the first meeting that took place. One would have to see, and I agree that you need to see more happening much faster, and one would have to see how that plays out.
It's hard to know what's going on because there's an old English phrase, wheels within wheels. There are many wheels within wheels here because we've seen our country coming under a little bit of pressure from the Americans. Could last night's meeting with Zelensky have been partly because of some of that pressure?
It may be, although it again would be very difficult to give a specific answer and say yes. I think the meeting with President Zelensky was always an opportunity, and I think there's a realization that this is important. But one must also be realistic. This is one of the meetings that happened. Mr. Zelensky is also meeting President Lula of Brazil, which is also quite important. And that has not happened before, and he has not been party to any of the processes that happened up to now. So that is important. President Erdogan of Turkey yesterday in his speech at the UN also said that he is going to pursue his role as a mediator and see if he can broker a peace deal in some way. And again, that is also going to start with small steps, probably looking at a grain deal again, see if one can get that going. I think the importance of this is not what is Mr. Ramaphosa doing, it is the collective. And it is in the end the collective that is going to make a difference. And important in this collective, of course, is the role of Mr. Zelensky. He's got his own ideas and his own peace plan. And that apparently was discussed again yesterday. And it is in these discussions where there's an overlap of these initiatives that one may see momentum in the medium to longer term. Not in the short term probably, but in the medium to longer term, there may be something in this.
When our president announced the African Leaders' Peace Initiative, I have to say it was, in my experience, unique. 6 leaders to be involved in this kind of thing. Also, the first time I'm aware of where leaders from Africa were trying to broker peace in Europe. And I think, Roland, that's an important thing. We shouldn't forget the significance of that. I suppose the question then becomes, Is it possible to know if it's made any difference at all? And maybe it goes back to your point about the collective. It's a real demonstration of how so many different parties around the world want peace in this conflict.
Yes, and again, that I think is more important than looking at the individual in a particular context outside of what happens in the global context. What is important is that it's a first in Africa, but it also signifies the interests and the importance of this for Africa, and also as a result of the impact of this war on Africa. And the important dimension here is that we've seen now a next round of talks with Mr. Zelensky. Will there be another round of talks with Mr. Putin? What is going to become of that? And it is all these initiatives in the end that is probably going to add significant pressure on both leaders, but it should add a lot of pressure to Mr. Putin, which is already under a lot of pressure. His freedom of movement is severely constrained. He's becoming under more and more pressure from even countries that initially was thought to be his allies or would have been supporting him. So I don't think it's early days. I don't think one must say this is not working. But also one must guide against an expectation that this is an immediate suggestion and there's going to be an immediate positive outcome. This is going to take time. The idea of this conflict that is happening is that it's not yet ripe for resolution. In other words, peace is a distant objective. It's not something that is going to be forced into the process immediately.
Roland Henwood, thank you, lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. Really do appreciate the time.